Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome retired General Jay Raymond of the United States Space Force for a fireside chat with Jeanne Meserve, host of SCSP's NatSecTech podcast.
Sit on this end. General, thank you for being here.
How's everybody? Good morning.
So you are the only military leader to have a chance to stand up a new military service since 1947, of course, the U.S. Space Force. It was a transformational moment, recognizing that space had indeed become a warfighting domain. The Space Force will soon celebrate its 6th birthday. Perfect time to sit down and talk with you about what it's accomplished and what challenges lay ahead. The space domain has certainly become more congested, more contested, more competitive. I heard recently that we're moving towards 30,000 resident space objects. What does that mean in practice and strategically?
Well, again, it's great to be with you. We had an opportunity to chat once before for the audience, and it's great to have an opportunity to have a conversation with you again, and it's great to be here this morning with each of you. It is clearly more congested, contested, and competitive. If you look back in 2019 when we stood up the Space Force, there was about 25,000 objects that were being tracked. Today, it's as of August, it was 48,500. That's a 93% increase. If you look at the number of things that are up there, back in 2019, of those numbers of objects, there's only 1,500 that were satellites. Today, or in August, that number was 12,750. And so it's clearly more congested. On the contested side, we continue to read about China and Russia building capabilities to deny us our access to space and the advantages that provides, everything from reversible jamming to directed energy to direct ascent ASATs to objects on orbit that are concerning. And we've read in the paper here over the last months about a potential nuclear weapon. So there's a full spectrum of threats. And so clearly it is becoming more contested and competitive. It is competitive. I think there's pros and cons to that competition. On the commercial competition piece, I'd really like to be able to harness that. What does that mean to us strategically? It's becoming a little bit more challenging to operate in space because there's more things there. It's becoming a little bit more challenging to launch things into space because you have to make sure you don't launch something into something else. It's manageable, but it's taking a little bit more work to be able to do that. I think it also means that space has made our world more transparent. That with the number of objects that are in space, a lot of those are intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance satellites. And if you want to do something on the face of the Earth today, it's probably a good probability that you'll be seen, and there's a level of transparency that we've never had before.
So talking about the congestion for just a moment, this is AI Plus Summit event. Could AI help more than it is already with the traffic management side of things?
Let me give you a story to highlight this. Back in, I think it was 2014, it might have been early 15, but I think it was late 14. Russia launched 3 satellites that they told the world about. They were 3 communication satellites. And I was the commander out at Vandenberg responsible for space traffic management, if you will, at the time. And we were tracking those 3 satellites. And then we saw a piece of debris, and that was not abnormal. Usually when you launch a satellite, it's not abnormal for a piece of debris to come off the rocket. And we were tracking another piece of debris, what we thought was debris. And a couple weeks later, a captain on console all of a sudden saw that debris start to maneuver. Debris doesn't maneuver, it's debris. No. Even business majors from Clemson know that's not going to work. And so it took a few weeks for us to figure that out. What if we had AI that said, if something is tracked as debris and it maneuvers, an alert comes right away. And so that's an example of where, if you look at the number of objects and look at the number of times we track a day, and look at all the conjunctions for every one of those objects against other objects, it's a big data problem, and AI could clearly be of help.
Is maximizing the use of AI critical to maintaining operational superiority in space?
I think in the future, maximizing AI is going to be required for superiority across the world. I mean, not just in space. And so I do believe that it clearly can help. I think, again, as I said, space is a big data domain. You don't, unless you're, I think there's like 600 and something people that have stepped into space as an astronaut. Unless you're one of those, you experience space through data or observations. And so if that's the case, I really believe that if we can harness that data and then apply AI to it, we can really help solve some of the challenges that we face at a speed that we need to be able to operate in.
And speed is essential.
Yes, ma'am.
In March, the Space Force released an updated version of its Data and AI Strategic Action Plan. A lot of it focused on improving the unified data library. Explain to us what that is, why it's important, why it needs to be improved.
It's exactly tied into the question that we just talked about. When we first stood up the Space Force, I had 2 young lieutenants come to me and say, "Sir, you need to build this service as a digital service." And I looked at them and said, "What does that mean?" I'm a digital dinosaur. I was a junior in college before I saw a computer with a mouse. And said, "Sir, here's what that means." I said, "Go build a plan." And so they went away and built a plan and came back. I think it was about a month later and said, "Here's the plan." I actually showed it to Eric Schmidt and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I do that and I do even more." And so really what we're trying to do is we started with data and trying to get our arms around the data that we have or that we could get, and trying to put that in a way that we could then leverage AI as it materializes. Our first big step was this unified data library, and that was a place where we could dump all of our data, if you will, and unify that data specifically initially for space domain awareness, and making sure that all the data that we had collected from the sensors that we have were in this unified data library, so we could then apply algorithms and AI on top of it.
A 2023 GAO report looked at that library, and back in 2023, they cited a lack of a single data standard, commercial integration, timeliness of the data. All those things were problematic. Are they still, do you think?
Yeah, I'm retired.
Yeah.
So, when I left, all hell broke loose, and then all went to...
That was a 2023 report, though.
I can't tell you that. I imagine there's still challenges. I mean, I know they're working hard at it. Excuse me. But like anything, it's going to take some time. But it had already started providing us benefit by having this unified data library. We knew it wasn't perfect when I left the play, if you will. I know they're continuing to work it, but I don't know the latest one.
So they dump all the data into this library. How's it then used?
Well, it's then discoverable by many different people. I mean, that's what we wanted to do, have a central place. I used to talk about, I'm still not the AI expert by any means, but I used to talk about being able to have a direct data feed so we could apply. And they said, no, you don't need data feeds, you need to have it discoverable. So we wanted to have it in a place where those that needed that data could discover it and then use it for their use.
AI is already a crucial component of space systems. Talk to us about what it is already doing for the United States Space Force.
Yeah, well, just in space in general, as I think through what AI might be able to do, if you think about space, for an object to stay in space, it's going 17,500 miles an hour. If it's not, it comes back. So the speed of operations is really, really, really fast. And so I think one of the things AI will allow us to do is move at a speed that's tactically relevant, if you will. And I think that's going to be important. I think it's going to be important in an area that we just talked about, in space domain awareness. Is more, I talked about the trends, and 93% more objects in space than it was in 2019, and the number of satellites is, I don't know what the percentage is, but significantly more than what it is today. Satellites are getting smaller, harder to track. I think AI will be very beneficial to our ability to maintain awareness of what's going on in the domain, which is really critical. It's the foundation of everything else that the Space Force does in space. I think historically, smaller satellites have had the Rodney Dangerfield "I'm not good enough" mentality, yeah. And I believe that smaller satellites now are operationally relevant. Smaller satellites coupled with AI, I think, are very, very powerful. And so if you look at intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, for example, and you take a company like, Truth in Advertising, I'm on the board of Planet Labs, but if you take a company like Planet Labs and you look at the amount of data that they have, and then you apply AI to it, you can come up with a lot of great insights. And so I think it will be very, very beneficial in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. I believe if you look at command and control and the ability to make decisions on a timeline that are really, really tight, I think AI is going to be able to help with that. It'll be able to help identify courses of action and recommendations for the commanders to be able to make a decision on. And then I think if you look at our digital plan, when we stood up the Space Force, one of the things we wanted to do was really harness digital engineering. And I think that AI can help in that matter as well.
When you talk about digital engineering, what do you mean? Are we talking about design here?
Everything from, we really wanted to go from everything from requirements to design to actually building of the capability, having digital twins, for example. And then once the capability is built, operating it digitally, training digitally, and having that same data thread throughout that entire segment. And so we really put a good, again, I don't want to overstate it. We were still babies at the time, but we had put a good step forward on digital engineering as it relates to the missile warning, missile tracking architecture that the Space Development Agency is now acquiring. But we really wanted to go everything from, again, requirements to design, to build, to test, to train, to operate.
I would think on training, you could do really very realistic threat modeling in simulations that would be of tremendous use.
Absolutely. And then also take those models and provide it to those companies that are going to build those capabilities and say, hey, if you're going to build a capability, you better be able to operate in this threat environment. If it doesn't, we don't want it. What
about an acquisition? Would it help there?
Absolutely. I think it absolutely would help. As I talk about, everybody used to yell at acquisition officers, say, you're not going fast enough. And I used to. I said, people would ask me, what keeps you awake at night? And I said, other than sleep apnea, it's not being able to go fast enough. You got to be able to go faster. And I used to beat on the acquisition professionals. Well, really, if you're going to build, and I'm making this up, I don't have the dollar figure, I'm just pulling something, a couple $2 billion satellite, you're not going to do that fast. It's going to take time. If you change the business model and leverage a more proliferated model with smaller, cheaper, disposable type of satellites, you can do things at a speed and a risk calculus that are fundamentally different.
Can AI do it all, or do you foresee someday that the Space Force will have astronauts?
I believe someday, we already have an astronaut. Well, we had an astronaut. He now has left. We had 2 astronauts. They were Air Force colonels that transferred into the Space Force assigned to NASA. And so they were working for NASA as NASA astronauts, but they were Space Force colonels. We, Colonel Mike.
Will the Space Force have its own astronaut someday?
I'm getting there. So we have 2. One retired, and one just got promoted to general officer and came back from NASA. I do believe in the future there will be a need for Space Force to have astronauts. I don't think it's next year. I think it's going to take some time, but I do believe there will be
And what will their function be? What will they be doing?
well, you can think of a lot of things. Search and rescue, security. As more and more, as the world moves further out from the Earth and goes to the Moon and Mars and beyond, I think there's going to be a need for some security in the domain, ability to, for example, search and rescue in the domain. So I don't want to overstate it, but I do believe there will be Space Force astronauts in the future.
So we've been talking about the very positive applications of AI to the Space Force and space environment. Are there downsides? Are there negatives? Are there risks? Are there vulnerabilities that are introduced by AI?
Absolutely, but I think there's a bigger risk if you just say we're just not going to go there because of the risks. I think we need to go there in a big way and figure it out as we go, and help shape what we consider safe and professional in the AI business, just like we do in all other domains. So I'm not a fan of let's take a pause and try to figure this all out. I'm in the mode of let's go faster, and we'll figure it out as we go, and we'll be the best, and we'll help shape what's safe and professional.
And a few things may break along the way.
I'm sorry?
And a few things may break along the way.
Yeah, they may.
So what do you see as the biggest risks? You say they exist. What are the risks that AI poses?
I think one of the biggest risks is that our potential adversaries are going to use it and be ahead of us, and they'll be able to move at a speed that we won't be able to move at.
That data and artificial intelligence strategic action plan that I mentioned earlier also talks about the need to bolster data and AI literacy across the workforce. Is this a problem?
Absolutely is a problem. If you look at, I remember when I was the Air Force A3 back in 2015, I got a briefing from an individual that was a data scientist from another service. And I remember saying, hey, do we have any data scientists in the Air Force? If I recall correctly, we had 3 across the entire United States Air Force.
Wow.
That's clearly not where we are today. We've upped the names. I don't know the numbers today, but clearly we've gotten better at it. But I don't think you would say that the military has a monopoly on not having all the experts that they need. I think the world is trying to figure this out, and if you're a data scientist right now or an AI expert, you're in a really good spot because you're highly coveted.
The Space Force has...
Let me give you another example of data and maybe communications. I was in Japan in 2011. I was the 5th Air Force Vice Commander, and Japan had a big earthquake, tsunami, and a nuclear reactor disaster. Right. Operation Tamagotchi is what the support operations were called, and I helped lead that support, the recovery operations. Low-level radiation had dispersed across the country. We were measuring it. We were flying airplanes over top of it and measuring the radiation. We had sensors that were measuring the radiation, but we had no way of displaying it. We had no way of having a common operating picture for this data. And it was really causing challenges. It was causing challenges between the different services, between us and Japan, between Tokyo and Washington. We weren't all on the same sheet of music. I picked up the phone and I called Google. And I said, how would you do this? And they said, well, go up to Google Tokyo. They'll be happy to help you. I got in a helicopter. Within a half hour, I was in a helicopter flying up to Google Tokyo. Walked in, and 2 people with a laptop figured it out like that and had us up and running kind of that day. We sent, but the reason why I was telling this story, I said, well, how would I do that? And they said, well, do you have anybody that knows Python? I said, what is Python? And they said, it's a computer language. I said, I don't know, but I'll find out. So I flew back in the helicopter, went back home, and I put an all call out across 5th Air Force, all the Air Forces in Japan, the U.S. Air Force in Japan. Anybody know Python? 2 people identified themselves as knowing Python. A first lieutenant at Yokota, which was the base I was at, and a young airman at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa. We flew an airplane down to pick up that young airman. He had only been in the Air Force for like 3 weeks. Flew him up to Yokota, put him on a helicopter the next day with the lieutenant down to Google, and we were up and running. But on the lack of experience, I'm sure there was more, but two raised their hand. When we built the Space Force, we were really trying to, because of that experience and because of the value that I saw with software. We were more hardware focused than software focused, that we needed to up our game in that. And so we worked really hard. We built a program to try to develop software coders that were internal to the Space Force.
So if Fukushima happened again today, more than 2 people would raise their hands if you asked about Python. Okay, great. The Space Force has become much more reliant on commercial capabilities. And I read recently that 14% of the Space Force civilian workforce has been lost through deferred resignations and early retirements. I know you're no longer inside, but looking at that number, do you think that affects the speed and efficiency of procurement? And will that make it harder to meet the challenges?
I don't know if it affects the speed and efficiency. One of the things that when we built the Space Force, we were trying to do was keep it small. We didn't want to be the big bureaucracy, and boy, we overachieved on that, and we're really, really small. So I don't think size equals speed, but I do believe when we built the Space Force, we really purposefully tried to keep it small. I think as I went through my 3 years in the Space Force, I think we were probably too small. I think we shot too low. And I think it would be fine if we weren't operating inside the Department of Defense, but if you're going to work inside of the bureaucracy of the Department of Defense, you have to have enough people just to go to meetings. And so I believe we're a little small. And so if you take that coupled with further reductions in civilian workforce, I would be concerned.
Do you see risks in the public-private interdependence that's been created?
I'm sure there are risks, but I think there's more opportunities than risks. I always felt that I was lucky. As a member of the Joint Chiefs, I'd sit in the tank every Friday with the rest of the Joint Chiefs. And I remember looking across the table at the Navy, the CNO, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Chief of Staff of the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And I'm thinking, I'm lucky. I've got this burgeoning industry. And they don't. And if I can figure out a way to harness this, I can move at a speed and at a cost that they might not be able to. If you look at what's happening now, you're seeing that now extend into other domains. You see that in the air domain with companies building unmanned proliferated capabilities, for example. You see that happening now in the maritime domain. That started in the space domain. And so I always thought it was there's many, many more opportunities if we could do this well and leverage this right.
We hear a lot about critical minerals and supply chain. Does this afflict the Space Force as it does so many other entities?
It absolutely does. It affects all domains. I think one of the things that I learned when I was the Space Force chief, we stood up the Space Force in December, and COVID hit just a few months later. In one way that helped us go at speed because the bureaucracy was at home, socially distancing, and we didn't have to go through all the wickets to try to get them approved. We could just run. On the other hand, what I think one of the biggest things that I took out of that was we didn't have a good enough understanding of our supply chain and our supply chain challenges. And when COVID hit, which caused a perturbation to that supply chain, it made it difficult. And so we've learned a lot, but clearly the Space Force, those same challenges apply to the Space Force.
How urgent is the situation in your view?
I think I wouldn't say it's a crisis, but I think it's urgent enough that we need to pay attention to it.
When I interviewed you 5 years ago, just in the middle of COVID actually, you told me that the Space Force's mission was deterrence. Is that still the mission?
Yeah, I think all military services goal is to deter conflict. You do not want to get into a conflict. If you were to go ask anybody in the Pentagon, they'd be the first to tell you we want to deter war. And if deterrence fails, to then be able to compete and win. God forbid if deterrence were to fail. But clearly, I felt that, typically when you think of deterrence, you think of the nuclear triad as our deterrent force, if you will. I really believe that space was part of that. And cyber was part of it, as an example. But I thought there were things that we had in space that could amplify the deterrence messaging. And if you could do that and deter conflict from beginning or extending into space, you could then potentially deter conflict from spilling over into other domains.
How do you find the balance between preserving stability on one hand and being prepared to fight if you need to?
I think they're in perfect harmony. I think you have to be prepared to fight. I think the way you deter is to do it from a position of strength and to, have the adversary say, not today. And so if you look at the deterrence calculus, there's two fundamental deterrence calculus. One is to deny benefit of attack, and then the other side of that coin is to impose costs, and I think you have to be able to do both.
How do you escalate in a domain where a kinetic action can have lasting consequences?
It can have lasting consequences, but it doesn't have to. I mean, there's multiple ways that you can, if you look at the space superiority missions, there are things that you can do non-kinetically, there's things you can do kinetically. If somebody were to do something in space, it doesn't mean that you have to respond in space. It's this integrated deterrence construct using capabilities in all domains, all capabilities with all of our allies and partners to be able to deter. And I don't think it necessarily means you have to end in a kinetic fight that litters space with debris, although I think you'd have to be prepared to do so and be able to operate in that domain if it went that way.
You told me in that interview 5 years ago that one U.S. priority in space was to develop norms of behavior. How's that going?
Yeah, so I went back 5 years ago, I probably said it's the wild, wild west. We don't have any norms of behavior, really, unless the Outer Space Treaty that was done in the 60s said you can't have weapons of mass destruction in space and you can't militarize celestial bodies. Other than that, have at it. Basically. And so we really worked hard to be able to put in norms of behavior. And there's been a lot of work going on in the UN, in other large bodies to be able to develop this globally. What we did was we worked with our allies and our partners. And so I pulled all of our allies and our partners together and said, okay, let's come up with a list of things that we can live with. And let's start living that way. And then modeling and demonstrating what we view as safe and professional behavior so we can shape that. The Department of Defense at the time put out a list of norms that we would follow, and our partners worked with us to develop those and to work with those norms as well. There's still a lot of work to be done on that front, but we've taken a first step at it.
China, Russia, are they paying attention to those norms?
I think we'd all be naive if we think that if we have rules of the road that everybody's going to follow them. But if you have the rules of the road and people don't follow them, you can identify who's running the red lights really quickly.
Do we even know what some of these competitors are doing beyond Earth orbit? Can we see something if we're not specifically looking for it? Could all sorts of things be going on out there?
Space is a big place.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it requires, we do not have the perfect domain awareness that we need. We have allies and partners that we rely on as well. We're the best in the world in that, but there's going to be a continuing need for domain awareness. I think, again, as I stated up front, that's pretty much foundational to being able to operate in that domain or in any other domain of warfare that you operate in. You have to have an awareness of the domain that you're in.
But right now, we don't have full awareness.
I would say we don't have perfect awareness by any means of everything that's going on in the domain.
The Space Force has just awarded the first contracts related to Golden Dome, in this case for space-based interceptors. First, tell us all about Golden Dome, because we don't know very much. Share it all with us. And secondly, do you see that project as shaping the future of the Space Force?
Clearly, I think Space Force has a big play in Golden Dome. I think that's one of the reasons why the gentleman that was picked to lead Golden Dome came from the Space Force. He's got missile warning experience. He's got missile defense experience working with MDA. He's been in the National Reconnaissance Office. He's steeped in acquisitions. He was a sitting 4-star general, and I think they picked the right person to lead that program. I think if you look at the Golden Dome in total, and I'm not again, I'm retired and we're not in the Golden Dome business, but if you look at what that's going to require, it's going to require sensing. It's going to require being able to fuse data. It's going to require being able to act on that data. And I think space capabilities, whether data transport layers as an example, or as you mentioned, interceptors will have a big play in that. I think the work that the Space Force did on the missile warning, missile tracking architecture that's currently being built is foundational to Golden Dome as well. So I think Space Force has a big play in Golden Dome, but it's not the only thing the Space Force does, but it will clearly have a big play into Golden Dome. What
big, important Space Force problem would you like to see AI address?
I would start out with, again, what's foundational is helping on the domain awareness. I think that's the thing that I think is the easiest target and the most benefit from day one. I think in the intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance business, the ISR business, I think it's another area that is ripe for AI to be helpful.
Looking back now on your tenure in the Space Force, what do you wish you've done that you didn't, or what do you wish you'd done sooner?
You know, and I'm not saying this just because I'm really happy with how it went. I really am. We laid out, you know, we sat down and we thought through what does an independent service need to do when we first started. There's no checklist on how to build a service. So we looked at, you have to develop your own people. You have to have your own budget. You have to have your own doctrine. You have to design your own force, both the organization and the force structure. You have to ready that force. And then once it's ready, you have to present those forces to combatant commands. And across the board, we laid the foundation on each one of those. On big, bold initiatives, it took longer. For example, we wanted to rewrite the rules for how you do total force integration. That took, I think we wrote a 160-something page legislative proposal to do that. It took Congress a few years to whittle through that, but we got there. I think if I were to say, what's the one area that I think still needs the most work, I would target it back to the acquisition side. And again, it's not just acquisition, it's the force, it's the requirements, it's the force design, and then it's the acquisition, and it's testing. I believe the Space Force has an opportunity to build that framework for how best to do that with commercial partners. And they've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of work towards that end. There's still more work to do.
So you mentioned earlier you wish you'd set a higher target number, that you started out with a larger Space Force. Do you also think, given the importance of space, that the Space Force should have been stood up sooner than it was? You know,
it was debated for 30 years. And I remember your first question to me back 5 years ago it was something along this lines, and but it was something like, a lot of people are laughing at the Space Force. What do you think about that type of deal? I'm like, I could have cared less. I really could have cared less. The only thing that I was worried about were the people in the Space Force would listen to the pundits, if you will. I knew the importance. The national security apparatus knows the importance. Today, I don't see a lot of people laughing at it. I think people understand the importance. It would have been great to do it earlier, but I'm glad it happened when it did. And I will tell you, I have not heard one person say, boy, we were better off pre-Space Force than we are with Space Force. We are clearly better postured today than we were before we had the service.
General Jay Raymond, thank you so much for talking with us.
It's great to be with you. And thanks very much for having me here. I hope you have a wonderful conference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.